Hello, hello, folks. Welcome back. It's your boy Chuck here. Sorry for the hiatus. We took a little winter break, but we are back. It's actually still a little cold here in Southern California. It snowed quite a bit, went up to the mountains, had a good old time. Almost died because I don't know how to drive in the snow, but it was okay. No big deal. I'm here. So, hey, on the show today, we have a special guest, another podcaster, and I think he has lots to say that I don't know because he has a lot of research that I kind of neglected. I kind of knew about some of it, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going down those rabbit holes because there's so many rabbit holes, unbelievable. And then I saw him post the books and things that I wanted to research that he was reading already. So I was like, I got to get this guy on the show, and we got to talk about some weird stuff. And so welcome to the show, Mr. Odd, I like to call him. How you doing, man?
Hey man, doing great. Doing great. Great to be on with you.
Yeah, man. Finally, we got this going, and we were kind of joking about how difficult it was to actually make this happen, and it's been more difficult than people might think. People don't understand the things that go into podcasting. See, like my phone going off again. I don't understand. I thought I turned this off. So, oh my goodness. Let me go ahead and turn this off right now. But before we get into deeper things and more mistakes on the show, but that's how podcasting is, man. We're recording, we're going, things happen. I got some episodes where people break into my door and they're like, "Hey, man," and I'm like, "Dude, I'm recording." You know what I mean? And I got tired of editing it, and I just left it in there in a couple of episodes. So, but before we get into the good stuff, the juice, why don't you introduce yourself and tell them what you're about, because I found you on Instagram, but tell them what you're about and why you got into this kind of research that you do.
Okay, well, cool. Well, my Instagram and Twitter is _ the odd man out. And I just got into politics a little bit before 9/11. And then after, that happened, of course, I just kind of, I don't know, I was kind of obsessed with it. And it was just, kind of like a lot of people, it shocked me, but I kind of opened up this other world that I never thought that much about. So after that, I just began to be really, uh, you know, I really got into it and tried to pay attention to what was going on and became extremely conservative. I was born in a conservative home, but we weren't political. So
No,
after
I'm
that,
glad that you um kind of make that distinction because people immediately assume like, oh, so he's a Republican. You know what I mean?
right,
And that's not what you're saying, right?
right. I mean, I became one after that, and was a staunch Republican. I like to say that I was so far to the right, I made Ted Cruz look like Bill Maher. So,
Whoa, that's quite a
but
statement.
right, right. But over time, I started kind of paying more and more attention. And around probably a year or so before the Romney Obama elections, I started figuring out, well, things aren't quite possibly the way they seem on some of these, different issues. And I started kind of paying attention to some of the Ron Paul stuff that I'd ignored because everyone around me in the conservative world said, well, he's a nut, he's a loon. And I'd never really even read anything that he had actually written or said. So that kind of got me into a little bit of Alex Jones, listened to him a little bit for a while. And then I stumbled upon the No Agenda show podcast. And those guys were really delving into deep, political analyses at that time. And that kind of like really opened up a world to me. So I really started reading, rare books and trying to read alternative history and whatnot. And people, over time would tell me you need to do a podcast, but I was listening to so many podcasts at the time. I thought, well, there's no need for me to do one. There's all these other guys are doing such a great job. But actually, I heard the author Gary Wayne on, I think it's a discontinued podcast now, but it was called The Fringe Files. It was
Oh.
It was a Christian podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard him and explain the kind of the alternative history of, or we'll talk about the antediluvian history and the secret societies and the bloodlines and all that, that just opened up a whole new world for me.
Mhm, mhm.
And that just it's been downhill ever since.
Yeah, and that's the thing that people don't understand. I think that's like in the fringe community, I think that's the biggest difference that we offer from being in that community of being woke about government. You know what I mean?
Right,
The whole difference between like those conspiracy theorists out there, as we're so called, as we're
right,
labeled, um, is that we correlate all these agendas, these big new world order agendas, and all these government plays with you know actual ancient history of the bloodlines that have been fighting for control for millennia.
right.
And once that's why I like, for example, more than ever do I like shows like I just started watching. I'm sorry. Oh, got a lot of feel a little bit weird in my chest, like I got a lot of air or something. I think I slept wrong, but that's another subject we'll talk about
Uh-oh.
on another show. But what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, like mythical shows, like kind of like I don't know if you've seen The Witcher,
I've
and
heard of it.
yeah, The Witcher, and like, and anything fantasy like Lord of the Rings and like things like that, because things that have to do with like ancient past and bloodlines, like Game of Thrones bloodlines, fighting for that throne and things like that. You start to realize, like, oh my gosh, there's actually more truth to these stories than we think,
Right.
and we see them as shows, but it's like, man, there's a lot going on, and so no, I'm glad you chose to do the podcast, because I think we need to make people aware that these ancient stories of bloodlines trying to take over, and they have a new world order agenda isn't new at all.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing that intrigued me so much. The more I looked into it, it was like, well, there is no wonder there's all these conspiracies, because a lot of times there is truth, and maybe they get blown out of proportion eventually and whatnot, but there's so much truth to it. And, you look at through all of the different, legacies over time in different parts of the world. And it's just amazing how much that seeped into our culture, our pop culture, especially movies, music, you name it.
Right. And let me ask you a question. You said something important. Sometimes these theories, they get blown out of proportion, and I would agree. So how did you, as a researcher, and now you're doing your podcast, how do you kind of sift, the bad stuff with the good stuff when you look into your research, and for maybe we've not mentioned so much, but on your show, at least with your posts, you have stuff that basically is all, hey, this is all part of the New World Order agenda. A lot of that stuff on your posts that you have,
Yeah.
Illuminati bloodlines, New World Order agenda, um, little bit of like the technology kind of that ties in with transhumanism a little bit here and there, and you have stuff that, like I said, I think maybe I think when we talked before, I said you have stuff that could upset both the left and the right side of politics, as far as people doing agendas or doing things that really just contribute to the New World Order, whether they're on the left or on the right, and so that's the kind of stuff that's on your show, and that's the kind of stuff that you post. And in doing so, I mean, you stumble upon some incredibly weird things, where you're like, I don't know if this is true or not, but amongst all of that, there is some truth. And that's why I find it important to continue to research and to see where things connect. And so, kind of what's your process? What do you do? Because I know you have tons of weird books that you're reading.
Yeah.
And how do you sort that stuff out, man?
Well, that's a good question. I'd like to say I have this awesome system to do that type of thing, or this way of filtering things, but really I just go with gut instinct, to be honest. But I try to, as far as like the modern day politics and the kind of the New World Order conspiracy, I try to really look into those guys that have done deep, deep research and have the historical facts to back it up, where they went back and looked at the documents and put those in their books and whatnot. And the guys like Anthony C. Sutton, I think, was one of the very best ones. Um, but Carol Quigley did that humongous book. Basically, it was a history of the New World Order, and he was supposedly an insider. I think the book's over 800 pages, but he really goes back to the late 1800s with Cecil B. Rhodes and or Cecil John Rhodes, excuse me, and he was the famous diamond miner, and they named Rhodesia after him in Africa. But it really started with the modern era started with his death, and he left this series of wills about how to start secret societies that would take over governments, because he was this England first type guy, and he thought that Englishmen were superior to everyone, and that they should take over the world. So he really left a detailed kind of plan to do that. And so that's where you get the Council on Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute of International Affairs and the Rhodes Scholarships, all these different ones. So that's
interesting. So, going back to the Game of Thrones things, do you see in your research things like that there are secret societies trying to take over other secret societies?
Well, not so much taking over other secret societies. I will say, as far as I can tell, I believe the Jesuits during the Reformation did kind of take over Freemasonry or infiltrate it. They actually created some of the higher degrees, because there were only 3 degrees up until that point. And so they actually created some of those according to the some of the writings. And they're so mysterious, it's hard to really get a lot of information about them. But that's the one that I can say I do believe took over, Freemasonry as far as that goes.
I only bring that up because, we see this kind of thread amongst like I said, shows and movies like Game of Thrones, where someone else wants to be in charge, but the goal is the same. Like, we want to have a new world order. We want to have control over everything, but sometimes very specifically they want a certain bloodline to take care, to have everything, right? And
right.
So we see this, and I know, like, in the research, a lot of governments work together, but there seems to be sometimes like this battle between them. Like there is a literal Game of Thrones as to what's going to take charge, and amongst the Christian community, there was kind of that feeling when Trump came into office.
Right.
That when Trump came into office, that he was like on the side of of Christians, but very specifically woke Christians. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So I think if I'm not mistaken, I don't know too much about our history, but if I'm not mistaken, I've not ever heard of a president being woke and then throwing little bones to the woke community with his messages, like tweets, like Trump, sending out tweets that are like Q related, you know what I mean?
Right.
And things like that, and like saying certain things that have to do with like conspiracies. And it drives CNN wild. They're like, oh, look, our president's a conspiracy theorist. He says this or that or whatever, And so obviously there weren't tweets before, long ago, but I can't think of a time where a president kind of openly communicated to its people in a manner that is considered to be conspiratorial. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so in doing so, I bring this up only because it would seem that on the other hand, there's other people that believe he's just part of the New World Order agenda. So it's like there's people that believe, no, he's here to fight the New World Order, and there's others that are like, no, he's just part of the New World Order agenda. And then there's that middle ground where it's like maybe it's a faction of the New World Order that want to take control and and they want to be pretty much a Game of Thrones situation where I want to be in charge, whoever's in charge of Trump. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And this is just the conspiracy. I'm not saying someone is. This is just what I've heard
sure.
through the research, and that they want him to, instead of like, because the conspiracy is, instead of destroying America, he wants to rebuild it and use it as basically the center to the New World Order. You know?
Yeah, yeah. There's so many theories, and at first, I honestly I didn't take him serious. Because he ran a couple of other times, but I started noticing how my coworkers at the time took him so seriously, and this was early on, and they had a whole different reaction to him than they had, McCain and in George W. Bush and whatnot. And I was like, oh, something's happening. But I started looking into him early on. I wanted to believe he was, something new that was going to kind of give, America back its sovereignty and kind of be the hope that we've been looking for. But I was a bit skeptical because if you start to look at his past, he's had dealings with everybody over the years, Democrats, Republicans, but he had taken a huge loan for Trump Towers from George Soros at one point. Uh,
Ooh.
yeah, I mean, it was a very big loan. I can't remember how much now, but I think it was around 90 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
But he also put Wilbur Ross in his cabinet, and Wilbur Ross worked for the Rothschilds for 30 years. There's all these different connections. Before he was elected, he met with the Council on Foreign Relations Director Richard Haass, and that's on record as well. But even after he was elected, he met with Henry Kissinger, who is the Council on Foreign Relations poster boy. He's kind of the New World Order guy who's
Mm-hmm.
he's met with, either been the advisor or met with every president, I think, since Ford, maybe even before that.
Yeah.
But so
Now,
I have,
for
I
the
kind of,
listeners, like, we're not siding here.
right, right,
We're just telling you, go do your research and you decide. You know what I mean?
exactly, yeah,
But it's as simple as that. So before people start saying, "Oh, you're Trump bashing," or like I said, I don't know if I said it in the beginning of the show, but I'm not picking a side here. I'm just telling. There's research. You want to go down that rabbit hole, do it. Take that red pill, and then enjoy the journey.
yeah,
But it's up to
yeah,
you. You know what I mean? Keep going. Sorry.
yeah. No, I would just say to people, keep a healthy dose of skepticism because we're in,
That's a T-shirt right there, bro.
right,
I'm
because
gonna I'm gonna put your logo on a T-shirt and Fire Theft Radio, and it's gonna say, "Keep a healthy dose of skepticism." Is that what you just said?
yes, yeah, I like that. I
Ooh,
like that.
oh yeah.
But I would just say, because one thing I think, especially for my fellow Christians, um, you know, we're like anyone else, and we get caught up in the cult of personality. And I'm not saying, I'm saying you make your own judgments, but I would just say this one thing: the Bible says a lot about Satan, but in the Bible, it never says one time that he's an idiot.
Yeah.
He is, no, he's a cagey beast, and so
Right.
we always talk about the Antichrist, but when there's someone who's very popular on our side, we never want to hear anything about it. So I'm just saying, we have a lot of warnings in the Bible about that type of thing. So we need to be, skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
We need to keep Christ on our minds and make sure we're following Christ in everything we do,
Mm-hmm.
because we veer off that, you know, we're in bad shape. You know,
Yeah, and I think the problem is, we tend to. I mean, naturally, we're always inclined to identify with something. You know what I mean? I
yes,
think that I think it's a design that God gave us. We were designed to really identify with God's image and what it means to image God, and that's a very deep subject in and of itself. But unfortunately, we live in this fallen world, and there are things that can take a hold of that what we're naturally programmed to be, and really identify with things that we shouldn't, or at least identify to staunchly with it, and kind of get
Yeah.
lost in it, and it becomes your entire identity,
Yes.
and I say that for politics. I say that for, I wouldn't say religion, because obviously people would consider me a religious person, but religion too. But what I mean by that is ideologically, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
within religions, there's doctrines and there is these separations, and sometimes doctrines define people more than the actual information itself.
Yeah.
Because, and I say that because doctrines literally sometimes come out of thin air. They're just made up, and
Right.
they're not based on any actual biblical foundation, and that goes for other religions as well. There's just a lot of sects of other religions,
Yeah.
and same thing, they're made up sometimes for political reasons, for whatever reason, and people identify with the doctrine way more than the information that is actually present, and so you get lost. You just get lost in it, and then anything that refutes it or anything else is, you immediately just want to fight it.
Yeah.
And you don't
Yeah.
want to look into it whatsoever. And so people need to, like you said, keep a healthy dose of skepticism, and then continue to try and walk a path of truth. But that actually requires work on a daily basis, and just to be honest with yourself. Like, does what I believe in hold up at every angle possible?
Right. Yeah. I totally agree. And the thing with politics, popular politics, they only give us two choices, and if you've only got two choices and you hate the other side, you're not going to ever. You're going to stick to your side always without really thinking about it, because, like I said, two choices. You've got no choice, basically.
Mhm.
It's the whole lesser of two evils. But if you pick a lesser evil for decades and decades, the whole thing could possibly become evil. So I just think that, yeah, as Christians, we definitely need to pray for discernment, and try to really kind of pick apart things and think about, well, how would Jesus feel about this? Or when a politician that we like does something that's kind of controversial or whatever, maybe we should think, well, how would we feel if it was the politician from the other team doing this?
Ugh,
Kind
don't
of be
ask
honest
people to
with
do that.
ourselves. Right.
Oh, come on.
Right. Yeah, that's too much. Yeah, that's too much.
At this moment, people just turned off the show.
Right.
They're like, yeah, you know what? This guy's crazy. No.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. No, but it's true. It's very true. And we should do that with, like, pretty much everything that we do. Like, how would you don't like someone doing, or you're doing something, and how would you feel if that's being done to you, kind of thing? Like,
Yeah.
it goes down to very basic principles, to be honest. It's like,
Yeah.
look at the argument, whatever it is, on both sides of the fence, and you start to realize, like, okay, maybe this is not as a good idea as I thought, or maybe it is a good idea depending on how you see it. But analyze it,
Right. Right.
analyze it.
Critical thinking.
Right, exactly. Critical thinking. So hey, let's talk about this. Look,
Sure.
so me and you, I mean, we have this understanding. There is a new world order agenda. There is um secret societies behind the scenes, kind of engineering things to create
Yeah.
this new world order. Now, to you, and I'm asking you, what have you seen that you feel is engineered for us to just take and be like, well, this is just part of what we do, but really it's something that is engineered so that we can slowly but surely just give ourselves over to this new world order.
Well, I would go back to the book I had mentioned earlier, Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley. Uh, he had written in there that the plan all along, after Cecil Rhodes died, and he put these wills together in these different semi-secret societies, I would say. He said the goal really was to have a two-party system, but allow or make sure the two parties really are nearly the same, nearly identical, just with a few different issues. And that way, like, your foreign policy and your debt and those type of things would stay the same, but we would have these social issues that we would keep, that would be different to keep the populace separated. So I
Hmm.
would say that that seems to be exactly what we do. Even though people would say we're more divided than ever, that's true. But the parties are more alike than ever. If you really get down to brass taxes, um, like I said, we do keep a few issues that are definitely different.
Hmm.
So
But are we? I mean, in your opinion, are we more divided than ever? Because I mean, looking back at like the punk history, the punk rock,
yeah,
and looking back at all of that came into the scene because during the time we had conservative president, and we I don't know, it just seems like it's a bit exaggerated to say that we're more divided than ever, in my opinion. I mean, did we forget the '60s and '70s, and and
yeah,
how everybody just kind of wild out and literally having orgies while having a concert and stuff like that because they were in
right,
rebellion to the government and things like that,
yeah,
in rebellion to religion, and I don't know. I mean, I guess we kind of have that with like our EDC concerts, but it's not. I don't know. I don't think it's to that extreme. From
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong, but I'm saying sometimes I hear these like phrases, "Oh, we're more divided than ever," and I'm like, "Are we though?" Because our history is pretty crazy, pretty violent. Like
Well, yeah,
I don't know.
that's good. Good point. I guess if you like, as far as social media, yeah, we seem like we're extremely divided. But it's kind of like people say, well, go out and talk to your neighbor. Maybe we're not quite as divided as some would think.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's just the amount, the ability that we have to communicate to each other on social media has really just like made it seem like, oh, things are out of control. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know.
Well, it's like if you go, like, the Twitter world is, I don't know, it's just a cesspool. I can't hardly go on there, but it's just all these people pontificating things that a lot of times they don't even know anything about. They're just fighting with one another. I don't think they even go on there to try to have a dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like just a big kind of like an avenue for division. And I guess Facebook's not quite as bad, and Instagram's pretty good, I think, for people actually talking about things. Oddly enough,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah, and going back to the thing. Well, actually, I want to touch on social media as well, but like, um, I think when you said that, what's the name of that author again?
Carol
Carol
Quigley with the G. Yeah,
Quigley.
yeah. So he was a professor at Georgetown University, and he was actually one of Bill Clinton's professors. And I think in Bill Clinton's, I think it was his acceptance speech, he actually mentioned him. And a lot of people would say, well, he's just a conspiracy theorist. But if you actually delve into his works, he's got another book called The Anglo American Establishment. And it's basically a shorter history of the Cecil Rhodes round table groups and all
Mm-hmm.
those secret societies. But yeah, the guy was very intelligent, and there's no question he knew what was going on with these groups.
Mm. And when you say it, I feel like when you said that, when did he write this book? How old is, do you know?
I think it was in the '60s.
Mm-hmm. And looking at our system, like our government system, yeah, it's a two-party system, and I mean, I feel like it's quite right where it says, really, I mean, there are some social issue differences, but the bigger picture stuff, I mean, the debt, everything, I mean, it's just there. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it's just unfortunate that at least since I've been alive, there's always some sort of war.
sure.
Something we got to fight. And your patriot would say, well, there's a lot of tyranny around the world. You know what I mean? We got, and the U.S. got to step in and do it. And I get that to an extent, but even amongst the conservative community, some of them, there's memes out there where it's like a country finds oil, and then the U.S. is like, "Oh, we must go save you." You know what I mean? and then and
Exactly.
like, and it's just even amongst them, they understand sometimes, like, okay, maybe we were over there for other reasons. Definitely didn't need to be over there. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But so we know that we can do it. mean, if unless they're absolutely ignorant, they can admit to at least a couple times that the United States has definitely, uh, taken advantage of their power, right?
Right.
Militarily, I should say,
Yeah.
And so, okay, and I'm not again bashing on the military. No, I'm
Of
none of that
course.
stuff. No, definitely, support what they do. Especially, I mean, I was talking to somebody like who like hates the military. He's like also like a woke person, and I'm like, bro, you understand that? Let's say that because he was telling me basically this is just a huge the war machine, war is racket, and I get that, but um a lot of the young guys actually don't know about the stuff,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're actually going there with the belief and the intention that they're going there for their country, and so they can, some of them give their lives for what we do, and I respect that a lot, you know what I mean, and I thank them for that, you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I still thank them for that. I respect that a lot, and and he was telling me that that's nonsense, none of it's true, and all that stuff. I'm like, but even if it's not, it doesn't, to me, take away from the everybody's sacrifice because they think that's what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And so I still respect the person doing it because, and matter of fact, I respect him even more. Because it's like, okay, well, maybe there is some shady business going on, but you're still going out there for your country and for what you believe in, and for the people in that country, and I highly respect it, and I highly, I'm highly grateful for that,
Yeah.
and I don't know, he kind of backed off like, I guess I see your point, you know what I mean, because regardless of what you might think, they're still being the people fighting, or still being self-sacrificing, you know what
Yeah.
I mean. But anyways, going back to that book, um the definitely parties, I can feel like, yeah, okay, we see that things are put together and engineered, and I would say more than ever now, which is kind of a weird thing when you start looking into who funds these things. The social medias,
Yeah.
these are obviously promoting a lot of weird things, people's minds and things like that. But in my research, I've seen that there's a lot of how do you call it? I don't know, information agents. I'm not sure what the word is, but they work on social media and they spread ideas. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're legit, just, like FBI, CIA, intelligence dudes just spreading ideas, just kind of like how they were at fault for the cocaine and for the drugs in the United States.
Right.
It's just now there's like different kinds of agents. They work with either actual spreading drugs or spreading diseases or spreading like information and different things like that.
Yeah.
And I believe that exists quite a bit in the social medias, and it influences people a lot. So I would argue that, and I don't think anybody would say no, that social media is a huge tool to engineer people to think a certain way.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Social conditioning, absolutely. Um, if you look at some of the writings of, oh gosh, his name escapes me now. He worked in the Obama administration, Cass Sunstein. So he has written several books about conspiracy theorists, and different things we need to do with people who have these conspiratorial ideas. But what he means, if you really start to look into his work, what he means by conspiratorial is really just people who are suspicious of their government. So he suggested in his books, and this is going back into, like the 2009, 2010, how uh, governments could go in these, he calls them chat rooms or social media groups, and infiltrate them, and to put other ideas in there. And so that's exactly what you're talking about. Also, there is, I can't remember the name of the company, but the government has hired uh, this scientific company to go in and create memes. I know this sounds like an insane thing, but if people can send me a message, I'll give them the link to it. You can actually download the PDF of some of this stuff. But they create memes to, make people think a certain way, because that's, we have a short attention span, and memes are
Dude,
a way to
I
get,
knew it.
yeah.
I kid you not. I was like, dude, I think you know how because memes are powerful. Like you have no
Oh
idea.
yeah.
Not only that, like you just said, they perpetuate ideas. You know,
Right. Right.
and and then if you're already engineering the mind of somebody, you know, and then you just want to just drop little nuggets of you're just watering them with like memes and different things like that. You're making this idea grow, and once that idea grows and takes a hold of somebody, it's just almost impossible to eradicate. And I'm yes, I am quoting Inception right now, and, and the movie Inception is is what I'm talking about here. Is what we're that's what social engineering is. If you watch the movie Inception, have you seen it?
I have not.
Okay, the show's over. We're
We're done.
yeah, I can't believe this. Okay,
uh,
you need to watch that movie.
okay.
Okay, Mr. Odd needs to watch that movie. Okay, so
Got it.
check it out, and it's gonna blow your mind. Listen to the what's it called the dialogue that they have. Okay,
Okay.
listen to the dialogue, and when you listen to this dialogue, you are gonna get your mind blown with how obvious it is that what they're talking about. Most people just watch the movie for the graphics. It's really well filmed. It's beautiful to look at. It's amazing. But what they're talking about, the movie Inception is exactly about that, about putting an idea in somebody's head,
Right.
and then um, sometimes they make them think the idea by saying certain things and and
Yes.
and not actually give you the actual idea that they're trying to give you, but they give you information that will create the idea in your own head. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
that way it seems like you created that idea and that it came from you. It wasn't engineered, but it was because they know how you will react to that information. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
so that's what
That's.
that's what the movie's about. So you need to check that movie out, man.
I
And
definitely will.
yeah, you got to check it out, man. I just saw it like 2 days ago, and I saw it recent. I saw it 2 days ago after all this research I started doing about social engineering, and I'm like,
Yeah.
this movie's about social engineering. Like and actually Christopher Nolan has a lot of that in his movies. If you watch the Batman movies,
Mhm.
same thing. Joker is literally the New World Order, order out of chaos, anarchy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And everybody's known that. He represents anarchy, right? But when you
Right.
start looking at the political picture, especially the recent movie of the Joker, he kind of rose up, and I don't know, it kind of had to do with modern times. I don't know if you saw it, but it's like same thing. There's kind of a conservative situation going on. He was like anti-conservative, and he kind of rose up, and all the people that were like against the system rose up with him, and he basically had a following instantly because he was this natural anarchist.
Yeah.
And if you watch the first Batman Begins, same thing. Batman Begins, we have this, Batman himself working for a secret society that's working behind engineering all the politicians and engineering society to be a certain way. And I mean, Christopher Nolan is on a good one. Like he either is part of the crew, or he's got some inside man telling him information, but he definitely knows a lot of this stuff because it's in all his movies. His new movie is even more trippier. It's coming out. It's called Tenet, and I'm excited about it because I can already tell just by the commercial
Yeah.
that he's like, going to reveal a little bit more of the uh, government things that they use in order to control,
Yeah.
and so it's really interesting. But sorry, I go on rabbit holes. Someone actually messaged me and he goes, it's a good show, but his he should let his what's it called, his oh my gosh, I'm losing the word. He should let the people he has on talk.
Oh, harsh, man.
Yeah.
Harsh. No.
It was
No.
I thought it was funny. I was like, yeah, that's true. I babble too much.
That's totally all right, man. I need to check out. I need to go back and watch those Batman movies. I'm not a big movie watcher, but now that I'm kind of like since I've really delved into all this, all this kind of alternative information, there's so many movies I need to go back and watch because people tell me, hey, that movie has all this symbology in it. And I'm like, oh, I don't remember that because I didn't know about that when I watched it.
Right.
But yeah, I found that the link about the memes, and it was Robotic Technology Incorporated, and it's called Military Memetics, and you can look that up. It was by Dr. Robert Finkelstein, and he,
Classic.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I didn't want people to think that was just something I made up off the top of my head.
Yeah, it sounds like you did.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, you're right. Though social media is just the perfect platform for psychological manipulation. They call it nudge theory. That's another thing that fella Cass Sunstein came up with. It was called nudge theory, and they were going to have, and I presume they do now. This was going back several years ago. These nudge groups in colleges to kind of push people a certain way, gently, by just psychological manipulation. I don't know if they were going to use like speeches or flyers or how they're going to do that, but I'm sure that it's been implemented now because that was quite a while back.
Mhm. No, indeed. Honestly, everything that we're talking about has when it comes down to engineering, you'll see it in that movie Inception. And
Yeah,
I saw that movie the first time around. It blew my mind as a movie, but then when I saw it again, as after all the research, and I'm just like, man, I can't unsee this stuff. Like this thing is everywhere. It's crazy.
right.
But I kind of had the suspicion that hey, man, what's weird? Actually, it's a little bit scarier. I had this thought, and I do this a lot sometimes, and trust me, it's just kind of weird, but I do this a lot where I'm like, okay, let's say I was part of some kind of society. You know what I mean? Let's say
Yeah,
I was like, what could I do? I don't know. I go into this little rabbit hole in my head. I'm like, what would I do? And then I'm not even kidding you. I had this idea. I was like, you know what? What if I would create memes to push an idea? You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
And 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 I thought of that, and then I was like, dude, if I'm thinking of this right now, I think this exists already. You know what I mean?
Of
Like,
course, yeah,
and
yeah.
and then sure enough, like you're telling me that they have this company generating memes in order to
Right.
perpetuate an idea. I'm like, dude, I knew it. I just like, I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, that is crazy. You know,
Yeah,
but going back to these things, like, sometimes people don't realize, and let's get into the weird stuff. They don't realize, you know, why we have a great suspicion about government officials, people in technology, promoting technology, because they're like, dude, government is government. It's just a group of people trying to look out for us, and maybe they get corrupt. I get it.
yeah.
But there's nothing weird or evil or occult about it. No, and I don't think they realize that both people in the technology world and in the government world read and practice some pretty weird things,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
if you research, it goes back to what we were talking about, that it goes back to ancient bloodlines, ancient religions,
Hmm.
that
Yeah,
their sole purpose was to try and take over the world by any means necessary, and sometimes by very evil means. And so, um, who in maybe the technology world or in the political world or maybe in the celebrities, who do you know of, have you researched that, oh, or I should say, stumbled upon your research that they kind of practice or do some weird occult things that if they knew where that came from, it'd be like really weird. Like you'd immediately be put off by it.
well, that's a good question. It's kind of hard to nail down specific things because they are so secretive. But of course, you'd go back to the Pizzagate and look into that kind of thing. There's a lot of people implicated in some strange things, but and I'm not saying that whole thing was 100% correct or anything like that. But I think it did lead to perhaps some of the people in government kind of being into some weird stuff. But if I would go back actually to Bohemian Grove, which is one of the more provable things that many of our leaders, top leaders, are involved in, and they do this every year. They go to this place and do a mock sacrifice under a gigantic owl, and they do these rituals and supposedly spend like a week or two at this place. So that's one of the things I would say that is more provable. But as far as like specific things, rituals, they're so secretive, it would be hard to say.
Yeah, and I think sometimes saying that might seem like I'm trying to ask you, give me proof that they sacrifice humans. I'm not saying that.
Right,
Know?
right.
But for example, we have Abramovich doing public, art, and the public
Right.
art that you can. I mean, if you just Google images of Abramovich, you're gonna find some very disturbing looking things. And you're gonna find politicians, you're gonna find celebrities standing in front of like someone who is naked and covered in fake blood or pig's blood and different things like that. There you're gonna find her writing her name on the wall or different things on the wall in different languages with blood. You're gonna find Jay-Z putting his head against her head. She was on the Discovery Channel as a spiritual kind of guide person, interviewed by what's his name that does the voice of God all the time, and he was God in Bruce Almighty.
Oh gosh, yeah.
That
Oh my
guy.
gosh. Yes.
That guy.
That's pitiful. The guy that started on like Sesame Street or whatever. I cannot remember his name. He's got the awesome voice. That's pitiful. We can't think of that.
I know. People are listening to us are like, are you serious? Oh, Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman, of course.
Yes. Yeah, got it. Got it. It popped into my head.
Yeah, and I would have thought he was one of the good ones. I was disappointed to see him with her.
Yeah, no. And so, we got Johnny Depp, his tattoos, his connection to he really stood up for that guy that the guy that was accused for murder. William Ramsey talks about it a lot.
The West Memphis Three
Yes.
guys. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and that guy, his name escapes me. Damien Eccles.
Damien Eccles,
But
yes.
so he's huge into the occult now, and he
Yeah.
writes books and does all these like demonstrations and stuff.
Mhm.
And when I was younger, I took up for those guys too, because I watched those those documentaries. And if I'm not mistaken, one of those guys who created those documentaries was killed in a weird way. But don't hold me to that. I think that's correct.
Yeah.
But I'll say, after I got a little older, I started thinking, maybe they did do that because, he showed zero remorse in those documentaries.
Mm.
And he acted like he didn't even care that he was going to prison. He was just like, oh, well. And I
Yeah.
thought I would have been scared to death, at that
Yeah.
age.
Yeah, no, the whole thing was strange, and so my point is that you know who I saw, and I was like, no, not him, Wolverine.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I saw
Yes.
him, with Abramovich, and they were in front of like this cake or that was made like a human body,
Yeah.
and then
Yep.
they cut into it and they eat it, just like like fake, like a mock cannibalism kind of thing, and
Right.
and just all these famous people, politicians, celebrities, you name it, along practicing stuff with Abramovich. And why I bring Abramovich so much up is because she does a lot of the things which was a remnant of what Aleister Crowley left behind,
Hmm. Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
then when we start looking into Aleister Crowley, I have a whole episode on that. It's like, dude, that guy was evil, intending to control and take over the world, and he wanted to be, Satan's right hand man in his own words,
Right.
and the things that he did were just disgusting, and the rituals that he was doing were just, like I said, just disgusting, and so we have a woman, Abramovich, practicing Crowley magic, and then
Yep.
we have all these people, behind Abramovich promoting her, like Oprah,
Yes.
and all those high profile people, and it's like, come on, folks, like look past, stop being stargazed,
Right.
and look past, the friendly smiles, the money, and all that stuff, and just look at the intention. All these people are influencers, and all of them, you can say, are like tools to engineer people to think a certain way. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And that's what actors are. And I don't know if people knew this, but in the movie, in the cinema world, if you go back to when they started making film, some of the most well-funded films were to promote political ideas, to socially engineer an entire country.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, gosh, let's talk about Hitler, right? I mean, the movies
Right.
the commercials. I mean, from my understanding, he was one of the first people to use the media so much to influence people, which is why he was able to convince an entire country, for the most part, of what he was doing, and I mean, he made movies. From what I hear, he made like all these like trick tracks, comic books, newspapers, everything. I mean, anything that had to do with media, like he just completely took over, and it was like one of those things where it was just pushing these ideas, and of course
Yeah.
they would use actors, actresses, great looking people, and hey, they're just puppets to kind of promote whatever it is that they're trying to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's disturbing when you think about it. Um, you know, you're talking about Crowley, and yeah, it's really gross and disgusting that those people are promoting Crowley-esque type things, and not just that, but he was a known racist, and he was known to treat women horribly.
Mm-hmm.
His Scarlet Women, I believe, as he called them,
Mm-hmm.
just not a nice guy whatsoever. And he's still practically worshipped by a lot of people. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I don't get it, and I don't get. This is where I get confused. The people that actually were racist and classists and fascists, and all these have reversed roles in today's society, you know?
Yeah.
And then they're looked upon as heroes and all of these kinds of things. And I'm like, did you know nothing about the guy? Like,
Right.
like they say if you want to control the future of a society, destroy its history.
Exactly. Yes.
And so I think that's what's going on. I'm like, dude, you must not know any of the history of these people for you to believe, that that's a good thing. Like people with Che Guevara shirts.
Right. Yeah.
Especially your modern day, college going, young, you know, what's after millennial, before millennial, like there's millennials and then there's
Was it
Gen
Gen
Z,
Xers? Gen
yeah,
Z. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Gen Z or whatever they are, um, wearing Che Guevara shirts, standing for liberty and all. I'm like, dude, that guy used to stone homosexuals. You know what I mean? Like, he used to
Right.
like, and you stand, especially like, these younger guys that are these younger, not guys, but guys and girls that stand for that kind of stuff. And I'm like, dude, what you're wearing is 100% against what you believe in. You know what I mean?
Right.
That guy
Yeah.
had nothing to do with your cause, just because you think it's a symbol of rebellion or something, and then that's it. Or people holding up the sickle and hammer.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, bro, what are you doing?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
God.
it's like that reminds me of the way Margaret Sanger is looked at by the certain people nowadays as this awesome feminist. But man, she met with the Klan and talked them into going for her birth control league.
Mm.
The whole thing. Oh, and one of the things that another thing people don't realize is the American Birth Control League, which is the predecessor of Planned Parenthood, and I won't get into details, but there was a fellow by the name of Lothrop Stoddard on the board with her, and that fella wrote a book called The Rising Tide of Color, which was just totally how African Americans are taking over, and the white race needs to do something about it.
Mm. And
And
I don't know.
people
I
don't.
don't actually bring that up. Do you, I don't think people realize that's how abortion and things got started in
Yeah, Yeah.
and it was to, again, plant the idea and and cause the means in society to make people choose to get rid of their child.
Right. Right. Yeah. It all came out of the whole, Darwinian era of, survival of the fittest, and they thought they could engineer a society. And even Darwin has, if you really do the research, Darwin was a bit of a racist himself.
Mm-hmm.
He worked in the Huxleys that worked with him. They were all into this, into transhumanism and trying to engineer a society. And Julian Huxley was the one that started UNESCO for the United Nations. So there's a long history of that.
What is
In his
UNESCO?
race, so it is, I forget what it stands for, but it's basically the United Nations agency to basically control, or I won't say control, but influence culture and education.
Mm.
Yeah. And so if you look into the Julian Huxley quotes and writings about transhumanism and about how technology is taking the place of God and all these different things, and then realize that he's the one that started UNESCO, you really start to get a flavor for kind of how United Nations was, you know, its agenda basically. But
Right,
that's a whole
right.
nother story.
No, no, but it all ties together, because it's all part of the New World Order agenda, and that's kind of,
Absolutely.
and so like, all these things might seem like a different subject, but they're just categories to the same subject. You know what I mean? And
100%. Yeah.
so like you bring that up, and I was actually going to bring that up. They say people who are aware of like George Orwell, 1984, and Julian Huxley's work, they'd say that the future, when they read that, the future would either be Orwellian or Huxleyan, as they would say,
Yeah. Yeah.
and when we look at how we live today, and if you read, and I'm in the process of actually reading George Orwell, 1984, but if you read that book and you read or know about at least the Huxleyan work, you actually start to realize that we're a mixture of both, right? And we're seeing
Absolutely.
us being like, because the Orwell was more of the government, the political, the social issue, and
Yeah.
then the Huxleyan was more like you just said, the technology taking over the place of religion or of God, and dude,
Right.
I see that more than ever, like on TV, and you'll see, people, scientists even say we are like gods now, because
Yeah.
we can cure this with that, or this is what we're gonna be like gods, we can. I mean, look at CRISPR technology. You can engineer your baby now.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I talked about this slightly on another show. Like I can, I'm Mexican, and if I get married with another Mexican woman as brown as me, I can, go to CRISPR and say, no, I want a super white baby, blue eyes, blonde hair, and I can engineer my child, and
Oh, it's weird.
it's really weird, right? And so you can do that, and it's crazy what they can do, and it's literally taking the place of creation of God, and
Yeah. Yep.
it's like, dude, these books were written so long ago, and what we don't realize is that in this past century, we've literally have been little by little throughout all the chaoses, all the wars, all the social issues within the countries, individually and also our country, like different countries, all of them are just this giant chaotic thing so that nation or companies or nation governments like the UN and its sub companies, like you said, UNESCO and things like that, can step in and then just start molding society amidst of chaos, and that's one of the things the occultists believe, right? Chaos out of order, right?
Absolutely.
Or
Yeah.
sorry, order out of chaos, sorry. And
Order of chaos. Yeah.
yeah, and so they create the chaos, you know and then they'll also provide the order for it, the answer to the chaos, and they're like, oh, this happened to us, boom, let's provide the answer for that. I mean, people, one of the first conspiracies, I think it was like, that was the reason for World War I and World War II. They wanted to create like League of Nations, United Nations, and all these things. They wanted an
Yep.
excuse for big power. I mean, would you agree with that?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, if you get into that Carol Quigley book, or if you want a condensed version of that, I meant to mention this. There is a great researcher. He's a Christian researcher named Dennis Cuddy, and he's written a whole series of books about that whole period of the New World Order and how it all came to be.
Mm-hmm.
But he explains in there that the New World Order basically wanted the First and Second Wars to create, for one, to create a huge amount of debt, which it did, which, then the banks would be able to have that much more control over everything. But it also creates a sense of fear, and people are much more easily controlled in a time of war. So people are more apt to start giving up their liberties here and there,
Mm-hmm.
So he said that was all a part of the plan, and the way he, describes it, it makes perfect sense.
Mm. I think the biggest thing that I'm realizing is it's just what I told you. Sometimes when I kind of babble on is because it's pretty fairly recent that I realized like so many things are working together for one thing. Like I just said earlier, these are all just subcategories to the big picture, and and we're unaware of that, And one of the things I want to go back to is we see a lot of politicians and celebrities do things, sometimes little things like mannerisms, or say a phrase, or say a word that is directly quoting like an occult book,
Yeah, yeah,
or an occult symbol that they do with their hands or something,
right.
and you just, I don't know, just like whatever, no big deal. I think one of the famous ones is George Bush said something about he was doing a very famous speech where he's basically saying he's quoting like a mystical book, you know what I mean, like a mystical book, like that.
Oh, yes.
And
I think yeah,
I forgot the
that sounds
name.
familiar to me.
Yeah, and you start looking into like uh who wrote these things, and it goes back this way. It goes, okay, you research some of the stuff, it goes back to like, okay, Abramovich does something like that. Abramovich practices Crowley stuff. Crowley and other people were involved with like Manly P. Hall Mason books, you know what I mean?
Right,
And then Manly P. Hall, is somehow connected. Those are with like Helena Blavatsky, and then
right,
Blavatsky, of course, is a huge you know spirit conjurer person, you know what I mean? And if I'm
right.
not mistaken, worked for the government as well, and I believe she helped start like what is it, Lucius Trust or something like that, and it used to be called Lucifer or something like that. It was crazy, and then and,
Yeah, I think that's Alice Bailey actually
oh, there you
that
go,
started the loop. Yeah,
there you go.
but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and I get, and that's the next name I was gonna say. I get those names kind of mixed up right there, and so that whole thing, like, it goes back so much, and it connects to all these people, and none of them had great intentions for society, but they tell you they do, and
oh
then
yeah, yeah.
they present this idea, and say this is the answer to what we're going through, and a lot of people gobble it up. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I think I remembered at least one of the lines from the George H.W. Bush. He talked about the 1,000 points of light,
Yeah, there you
and
go.
he's actually, I don't know if it's still around, but he actually started some sort of foundation called the 1,000 Points of Light. Uh, one of these NGOs, I guess, that supposedly do charitable work, but a lot of times it's those type of things are end up being like a type of way to fund to funnel money. But yeah, 1,000 Points of Light was a direct reference. And like you, I get them mixed up. It was either in an Alice Bailey book, or there's another one of those occult writers, Annie Besant.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those two writers, and they're both affiliated with Theosophy. And so that's where he got that whole 1,000 Points of Light.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then I'm like, well, let's say he's not reading those books. Whoever wrote the speeches, you know what I mean?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and just while we're talking about this, I read an article the other day that kind of surprised me. I wish I could remember where it was. I'm sure I have it saved in my phone. But anyway, it was talking about how Ronald Reagan was a big Manly P. Hall fan, and he loved to read him. And that
Mm,
was,
no
I didn't
bueno.
see that one coming.
Yeah. No, that's not good. See, and I mean, if you start, people do your research, who's Manly P. Hall, it's no bueno, you know?
Yeah,
And again, that guy, I mean, all these people that are heroes now, sometimes I'm like, yeah, you must know nothing about that person then, in order for
right.
you to think that that person's a hero. And it's just weird. But let's actually talk about those symbols. I saw a post on your Instagram, and it said, and I'm gonna just read it right here, just because it's interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where you get your illustrations from. So I mean, maybe you can tell them where people can find this information. But you put what people use as the rock sign, like the rock symbol, the devil horns kind of thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then believe they have it here. I don't know. And you have a drawing, a picture of it, and I'm not sure where'd you get that picture from. Well,
Actually, I just got that picture from Pinterest, I must admit.
uh huh.
But I really just this past week, I bought a ebook called Beware of the Evil Eye, Volume 1. And actually, there's 4 volumes, and I've just begun to read it. But it had a picture of that hand sign in there. It wasn't as clear as that picture.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it gave the explanation is that it's uh, actually a sign that's supposedly supposed to ward off uh, evil. And if someone gives you the evil eye, then you would give that sign back.
Mm.
But I've also heard different people describe that hand sign as giving the evil eye. Because, if you look from the side when you make that sign, there's kind of a hole between your fingers and thumb.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard people say that's the actual evil eye. So, it's a little bit conflicting. I guess it's probably something that's been around for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. So,
Yeah, yeah. This here, I like how it's called. It's called the mano cornuto, which I'm not sure what language that would, probably maybe Latin or maybe Italian. I don't know, but
yeah,
it just means the horned hand, and
right.
what you have underneath is really interesting because people might not know, and I'm just going to read a little bit out of it. And it says gestures and defensive actions have included spitting, the touching of genitals, the display of the mano fica or the mano cornuta, and the extended middle finger or high sign, the digitus infamis, right? And the wearing of amulets and display of protective devices in the home, fields, shops, public places, and thoroughfares. Amulets carried or worn by humans and animals include necklaces from which are suspended images of the blue eye, eye of Horus, or replicas of the phallus and testicles, and things like this. So all these things that we kind of don't even think about today,
Right.
came from these kinds of things. No, I don't think people realize that, right?
Yeah.
And so let me continue reading here. It says a little bit more over here. Where did I leave off? I wanted to start in a specific place here. The hand. Oh, so you're giving more um examples of like what can be done with the hand, like the hand of Fatima, Hamza, the hand of Miriam, Hamesh, or small. What is that? Pooches? Pooches? Is that how you say it?
I'm
Uh,
not sure.
Containing bits of plants, herbs, especially rue and garlic, or citation sacred texts, parchment, the wearing of bells, iron earrings, embossed fingers, and all these different things. So the point is, have you ever read or heard of what um like the Watchers did when in like the Book of Enoch? Have you ever read the Book of Enoch or anything like that?
I've read bits and pieces of it, but I've never sat down and read the whole thing.
So part of I listened to the whole thing, and I don't remember everything, but I part of the things that they gave to women was how to look better, and
Right.
and
Yeah.
technology. Basically, they gave them technology, like how to do um, makeup, you know,
Yep.
how to do metalworking and make jewelry, make themselves look more seduced, like the art of seduction. They taught them how to seduce and all these different things. And basically, the stuff that they gave them, and this is to dull it down so people can understand why I'm bringing this up. They gave them tech, they gave them information in order to help engineer them to how they wanted them to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I bring that up because that's how I feel technology is today. You know, we think technology like great, computers faster, uh, the image is sharper, hooray technology. You know, we don't really
Yes.
think much of it, you know?
Yep.
But when you start thinking about how technology was used in ancient times, it's still being used that way today in our times. And it's the same thing. It's being used in order to engineer and control people. You know what I mean? And
Oh,
back then, of course, obviously they didn't have, you know, the flat screen or whatever, but they were used. The point was is that these fallen entities gave people tech, and then they manipulated them with the tech. You know,
right.
and today we have you know people making technology, and it's the same exact thing. We have there's no difference. As the Bible would say, there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so we're experiencing that. And in your research, have you seen people who come up with technology? Have you read people that come up with technology and they attribute that to a spiritual experience or an entity or something of that nature?
Well, not necessarily that, but I totally agree with you about we don't really have a healthy fear of technology, and the potential for it to be used in an evil or nefarious way. I mean, it's practically endless, because we just want it to be fast, accessible. You know, we, people talk about the microchip. People getting a microchip. Well, why would they even have to? We have it in our hand all the time. We can be tracked, we can be spied upon, listened to, watched. They know every website. If people wanted to know, if they know how to get that a hold of that information, they know exactly every website we go on or have ever went on.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I don't recall exactly anyone mentioning the occult with that, but I may have read stuff like that in the past.
Yeah.
But I certainly believe that it's going to play a part and is playing a part in the end times, if you want to
Yeah.
call it that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely believe that there's a uh, something brewing, and us. I mean, eschatologically, I'm not sure how that's going to look like, but there's something brewing for sure, and we're just like, man, I wonder what that's going to look like. I wonder, and seeing as how technology works, it's like, man, it's going to be rough for us to, you know, rise against when they kind of lit. I mean, goodness gracious, we're having these conversations, and I have two phones in the room. You know what I mean? So, uh, it's like, ugh, kind of sucks, but I don't know at this point, like, what can we do? You know what I mean? I mean,
Right.
I know. I was telling someone like who was I talking to last time? I was talking to Tracy, and I was like, it's funny that you're selling books that are anti New World Order on a platform that promotes New World Order. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's just kind of one of
That
those
is
things.
funny.
It is funny, and it's just one of those things. But you know, I guess let's be glad that we can do it thus far. That we're allowed to,
Yeah.
but we starting to see those restrictions for sure. You know what I mean?
Oh,
And,
definitely.
yeah, and so going back to those symbols, my point of bringing all of this up is like going back to those symbols. Uh, you know, we I don't know if you saw that the Time magazine cover where Trump was leaning against the obelisk.
I didn't. No, I didn't.
So when he became president and he started like which is really weird to me. I'm not. First of all, Time is like a super shady, shady like organization. You know, it's like shady.
Yes.
Just not, it.
Yeah.
They'll push. uh, I'm not sure. They'll push. I mean, they used. I mean, they had Hitler on the cover for goodness sake. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
so.
Right.
And of course, I know people would say exactly because Trump is like Hitler. You know what I mean? Because I know I'll open that up, but that's not what I'm saying here. My point is that the cover was really interesting. It kind of blew my mind, and especially if if you're in the know when it comes to symbols, and people know, and especially in our community, that the obelisk is like a phallic symbol. You know, it's a symbol of power and fertility and all that stuff. You know, and he was leaning against it. Okay, and
Yeah.
and he was as high as the obelisk. He was like the one in Washington. You know, he was like a
Yeah.
giant. He was leaning against it like a giant, and he put his foot against it, and he broke it in half. You know,
Oh,
and
wow.
and that was a symbol. And when I saw that, I was like, it almost made me like I was almost part of that community where like, dude, he is going to destroy, like, he's the anti New World Order kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like he's anti,
Yeah.
because it's a very symbolic gesture. And if you know anything about these symbols, it's like, dude, that's huge, right? And me just telling you
Yeah.
right now, you're like, whoa, wow. You know what I mean? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
you know, and and when I saw that, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I don't know, maybe he is gonna do some, very anti New World Order stuff. And at first, I mean, it seemed like he was exposing people that were part of the Pizzagate situation. You know, people are getting indicted. People are getting, and I follow some of the work of Liz Crokin. I don't know if you know who she is,
No.
but Liz Crokin's she used to be also like a reporter, a researcher, and now she basically just dedicates herself to exposing the whole um um you know, exposing Pizzagate stuff and celebrities that are a part of it and child trafficking and all that good stuff,
Oh,
and
okay. Yeah.
that's what she does. Um, and so I'll follow her stuff, and then like, okay, this person has been arrested, even though it's not reported on the news. There's been this person who was arrested. There was this place that's been closed down, and there's this other place that this other celebrity posted something that was very weird, like very pedophile like. There's a lot of celebrities that post a lot of pedophile stuff, and
Yeah.
people just say, oh, he's just being silly and funny. You know what I mean? and
Right.
and it's just too many coincidences for that to happen. You know what I mean? And um, anyways, so when she brought that up, and uh, when she brought it up, she was saying like, see, this is proof that Trump is trying to take down the New World Order. And I don't know. I'm just asking your thoughts here. Why would Time post him like that? And I feel I'm like confused by it, because I'm like, Time, him, the obelisk, the broken. I don't get it. Like, what's going on here? What would that mean to you?
That's that's a good question. So the obelisk, I think, originally was a symbol for Ra, the sun god Ra, or Osiris. Um, and yes, like you said, it's a phallic symbol. Um, I don't know. That's a good question, and I would love to believe that he is going to do that. But um, like, here's something that really puzzled me. Okay, one of his main things was, I'm going to drain the swamp, but so far he's had about a dozen Council on Foreign Relation members in his administration. He's had several Bilderberg members and over 30 George W. Bush appointees in his administration. So it's like, it's hard to imagine draining the swamp that way. So I don't know. I hope so, though. I mean, I really do hope I'm wrong about all this, and I hope it's all stopped. I can't imagine though the power that they've had for so long. I mean, this plan's been in place for, if you listen to Manly P. Hall, the New World Order's been in place for, you know, in the planning for thousands of years, but at least for 120 years. Um, and I told my friend early on. He said, "Well, he's gonna change things." I said, "Well, if he really starts to change things, he's going to be assassinated because that just seems to be the way things work." And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But that is strong symbolism. I'm going to check out that time, get that cover, and it could be possibly could have a double meaning. A lot of these esoteric things have multiple meanings, and you kind of have to really start to dig, almost go down a rabbit hole to figure out, well, maybe there's something else to that. Doesn't mean quite what we think. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And then
I definitely think they're with their covers. You can tell that they're influencers. They purposely make these controversial covers to. They have a reason. Like you're saying, they definitely have some kind of reason for doing those type of things.
yeah, I saw another picture of his wife with a blue dress, and that was weirder too because, especially if you know what the symbol is, she had a blue dress and she had an obelisk on there as well, and it started. The dress is a long blue dress, and the obelisk started from you know, it was behind her, between the legs, going right up to like her butt area. You know what I mean? And
Years.
yeah,
Oh,
and I was like, wow, if you know what that means, like, that's a symbol of a penis. You know what I mean? And
right.
it's like,
Yeah.
and it's just placed right there. And not only that, they added like a little sparkle on top, like just like I'm like, dude, that's totally, why would they do that? You know what
Wow.
I mean? And and I saw that picture and I was like, dude, this is crazy. Like, what's going on here? What's up with this obelisk situation? Like, why are they using that? And then his daughter, I believe I saw this on yours. Um, she always has that little red string on her wrist. The little red thing,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that comes from if I'm not mistaken, isn't that like something like that? There's like a Kabbalah type thing or something or other.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's supposedly they wear that red string to ward off the evil eye and,
Right.
and things like that. Yeah, but her and her husband are they go to a Chabad temple, which is a Hasidic Jewish temple,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a very strict form of Judaism, and they directly study the Kabbalah, which I was very surprised when I first uncovered that because I would never have guessed that. But yeah, that's true. It's very true.
Yeah, and that's just another thing. Like, there's so many like weird supernatural things, or I wouldn't say supernatural, superstitious things that they do, and it's just hard for me to believe that they're sold out to Christianity. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, that's with that's another thing early on with him. I was a little skeptical because like I remember some reporter came up to him and asked him what his favorite Bible verse was, and he was like, "Oh, well,
I don't want
I
to
like
talk
them
about
all.
it.
Yeah, I like them all. They're all good, you know."
No, I
And
saw another one where he was like, "Oh, that's very personal to me. I don't want to do it. I can't do a Trump impression, but he's like,
right.
and it's like, I don't want to share that. It's very personal. I don't want to. It's too personal." I'm like, "Oh, really?"
I mean, you would think that somebody would at least pull out the 23rd Psalm or something, that they could say, "Hey, that's my favorite,"
Yeah, yeah. Well, as I walk in the valley of the shadow of death,
Right.
start rapping it. Just like,
Yeah, there we go.
mm, mm, mm. But no, I agree. But like, I mean, who knows? God knows.
That's right. Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
not trying to piss off anybody that listens to us. Sorry if we're stepping on your toes here. We're just having a conversation, me and Mr. Odd here,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we're trying to sort out this information that we've found, and that's all we're doing here.
yeah,
Um, and I think people have realized a lot of these podcasts lately. They're just, I'm trying to have a conversation with you, and I ask questions, yeah, but it's like it's a conversation,
yeah.
and
We're just spitballing,
mm-hmm,
just trying to get people to think.
yeah, and so let me see what else. I think I think that's all I got for you. Unless I'm sure I have a tons of things I want to talk about. We can go on tons of rabbit holes,
Right.
but I mean, I just want I want to direct people to your Instagram page because you leave a lot of little breadcrumb trails there,
Yeah.
and then plug your show. Where can they find it, and what is it about exactly? If you want to tell them a little bit more about what the show's about, and just let them know where they can find all your information.
Well, awesome, man. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm really thankful that you asked me to be on. Um, yeah, it's the best place to find me is on Instagram. It's underscore the odd man out. And at the top of my profile, there's a link. It's a link tree, and it has the links to all my other stuff, my videos, Facebook, Twitter. My Twitter is also underscore the odd man out if you want to holler at me there. But yeah, in the podcast, you can find, if you type in, it's on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Podbean, TuneIn, and Podcast Addict, I think. And if you just if you search the Oddcast featuring, and that's FT period, the Odd Man Out, you probably won't have to put in the whole thing, but there's other Oddcasts. And if you put that all together, it'll pull it up. But anyway, yeah. And I appreciate it, man. Check me out. Got any questions, please feel free to get a hold of me, and I'll try my best to answer your questions. And I hope I didn't make people too mad.
No. I mean, if they get mad, that's on them. Not your fault. It's their fault. I like to say that all the time to take the responsibility off of what I just said.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm kidding, folks. Okay, cool. So, hey, stick with me. Let's let these folks listening to these dope tunes, and then, folks, we will be right back.